My name is Loretta Colvin. I'm a nurse practitioner practicing out of St. Louis, Missouri. I work for SSM Health, which is a multi-state health system and has multiple sites within the St. Louis region. So we are what I would call a more decentralized model, offering sleep at some campuses and pulmonary and sleep at other campuses, compared to an academic model that's a more centralized model. And I'm going to be talking this weekend about sleep disorders, everything but sleep apnea, essentially, as well as reviewing PAPP downloads and trying to tease out a little more information from the data that you get on the report and online.
Great. Well, I'm Ann Cartwright. I'm a physician assistant, and I am in an academic model. I'm at University of Colorado, and I've been in sleep for over 15 years. At this conference, I already gave a 2-hour boot camp on sleep devices, all the stuff to touch and feel. And then tomorrow, I will be giving a presentation on neurostimulators for sleep apnea, so both for obstructive and central sleep apnea.
And I'm Nan Alexander. I'm a nurse practitioner in Connecticut. Prime Healthcare, we're a multi-specialty group, private practice, still owned by ourselves. I am shareholder of my practice. I'm in a hybrid practice with another physician. We do sleep, internal medicine, and pulmonary. We also have a divided pulmonary sleep separate from us, which we had an annulment a few years ago. And I'm actually a shareholder owner of the practice as well as on the board of our corporation. So I have a very hybrid model, which was the standard back in the day. And now we have more specialties. So it's great to have the 3 different venues of practice.
Great. All right. So our first question is we're going to talk about consumer devices and a little bit about what you guys are speaking to, because I know both of you have talks where you get a little bit into consumer devices, and then also where you see this fitting into your own practice. Where do you see it maybe fitting into your practice in the future? So Nan, I'm going to have you start, and you do go by Nan, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
So, and formally Nan by most.
Okay.
So, yeah, tomorrow I'm doing I cheated, updated sleep. So I chose one avenue rather than cover all of updated sleep. And I'm looking at the consumer devices, i.e. the Apple Watches, the wearables, the wearables that tell you how you're sleeping and what stage you're sleeping in. Because my patients come in all worried because they use these devices and they're convinced they have every sleep problem known to man. And now they have anxiety on top of their insomnia and their apnea. Mm-hmm. So it just was a way for me to tease out. And they do have some reliability data, which is interesting. And one has actually been approved to be a home sleep study, though it's not able to be ordering it. So it's looking at how these patients come in with all this data, and what do you do with it? Because their anxiety is so large on this. And then they do have a secondary OCD development over this insomnia because they're looking at their device all night long instead of trying to sleep. So I don't know if you guys had people come in with those.
Yeah. So what I tell people, and I admittedly have not spent the time to look because each device is different.
Correct.
And I know some are more reliable than others. So as a general rule, I tell people they're okay. They're not perfect. Some are better than others. And I ask them if their experience of their sleep fits with the information they're getting from their device.
Correlation.
If their device says they're sleeping terrible, but they feel like, no, I hardly wake up, I feel rested, I don't care what your device says. But if it correlates, then maybe that's useful information. Is that correct? Is that what I should be telling people, or am I off base?
I think pretty much, yeah. I mean, we know that the wearables, i.e. sitting next to your bedstand, is less accurate than a wearable, right? So if you have a watch or the Ring device, they're just more accurate. They have more data points that are real versus, is it you snoring or your bed partner?
Right. Yeah.
So the wearables are a little less sensitive, though they do have some data. But I think the biggest point is we have to be prepared as clinicians when people bring this. We have to know about them and then identify which are less reliable, and then just be able to have the conversation to either diffuse anxiety over them or to validate, yeah, we should look at this further. So that's the hardest part is, I would tease through some of that because to me, every new thing my patients come in with it quicker than I can read about it sometimes, because they got it on sale on one of the the home shopping networks or Amazon or one of those things. So it's just trying to stay ahead of what they have.
The research, sorry, in the research, what devices seem to be the most accurate for, number one, detecting sleep correctly, and number two, detecting deep sleep or REM sleep?
The Oura Ring, because it's wearable and has temperature variations.
Oh, okay. So it's
As
more
one-
accurate.
It's more accurate.
Okay.
It's more of the variables. But the Samsung Watch actually was the one that I think was approved for being a sleep study. Though you can't order a medical device from it, you can then say, yes, you should need a sleep study. So I do see some value at home screening, but I also think there's some overperception. And then, of course, people with insomnia, it's just a nightmare because they're over-focused on their sleep, and this adds to one more data point of them over-progressivating. They just
I
totally
think it
worry
does
about
contribute to the hypervigilance
It
that can be
does.
characteristic of chronic insomnia. And so it is one thing that I try to give them a better expectation of what that data helps them with and doesn't help them with. But really, like, I try not to talk about their data, and it sounds kind of callous, but I try not to get into the data when they're there because I'm really more interested in their perception, because that's what's going to drive our decisions about what behaviors seem to be working the best. And so thankfully, they kind of get it and stop telling me the data pretty quickly, so we can talk about what I feel like is more clinically meaningful for the goals I'm trying to help coach them with.
And I think that's absolutely the truth. But I think if you don't even know the devices, that's where the problem rubs. And I think we just need to have a better knowledge of what's in the community, because they do. And both to use and, coach them on what not to rely on it for.
And I believe the AASM, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, has a section on their site, I don't know if it's for members or general public, about wearables and kind of keeping up with some of that data and technology for you all in one place. Have you guys looked at that?
I did for the talk, and they do.
Yeah. Is it helpful?
It
I haven't
is
looked at it
helpful.
yet. Okay.
Kind of broad strokes, but it's helpful. But I think, that's the kind of thing, it's one more thing for us to keep track of,
Yeah.
because our patients will be coming with it.
Yes.
So if you don't
Yeah.
have any knowledge base in your, or you say, well, really, I don't believe in it. And that doesn't really work either, because we do have data that it should be partially believed. But it's how do you use it, and how do you not have control of the conversation and not control the whole visit?
That's an interesting way of looking at it, the control the visit versus I like it when it triggers the conversation.
Correct.
But I don't like it when it controls the conversation. So triggering the conversation, you mentioned the watch that could be a sleep study. So that can trigger a conversation about, well, now that the watch is telling you there's a problem that you might not have been aware of, or you might have minimized, well, yeah, she says I snore, but I don't think I have a problem. Well, now we're seeing there's more objective evidence that there could be a problem. So let's talk about how we would test for it in a diagnostic study accepted by your insurance to qualify for treatment, yada, yada. But then you've also got oximetry. So occasionally you'll get a patient who their AHI, or let me say events per hour, their events per hour may be reported as normal by their machine, but they're coming back to you saying, well, my watch says my SATs are in this range. So it can trigger a conversation about, well, maybe you only had a home test and never had a titration. You're at risk for obesity hypoventilation. And now we probably really should do that formal in-lab study. In the old days, we might have done that all at the beginning, but it doesn't mean we can't go back and get a titration when we have a clinical indication. And then for patients with other sleep concerns, it can trigger new conversations about some of the stuff that they're looking at from an objective wearable standpoint, but then they compare it with what are their perceptions of sleep, experiences with sleep. So I do like those kind of triggers, but yeah, kept in moderation.
Yeah, so you can still stay in control of the conversation and guide them versus, keeping their anxiety at bay.
The other interesting one is the snoring apps, because when people live alone, they don't know that they snore. So I don't have a lot of people using it on the screening side, but of course we have a lot of dentists that like to use it as their kind of first check on the dental appliance to try to get the patient as close to the right position as possible before they get that formal objective testing. And so it's very interesting. I just had a patient recently that was talking about that. They were like, well, we felt like I was ready for the sleep study because my score went to such and such. And so they were already getting some kind of other measure to help us plan for and really spend their money more wisely. So many people are seeing the cost of their sleep study that it's nice that we can be a little more strategic in when we use it and how we time that.
And it's nice actually how it disciplines. And that could actually come in. We had a question today on my sleep apnea talk. When do you retest after weight loss, like bariatric surgery or intentional weight loss? And we usually say it's when you're at kind of your goal weight or close to it for a period of 6 months. But that's another thing. Maybe that snoring app would be beneficial if there's less snoring. Is that the time to retest non-apneics when they snore less a night without it? So that's another possible way to help save money and be, a steward of people's healthcare dollars.
Or how would that wearable home test,
Right.
consumer-based, be something that could be a tracker over time? Still not the true, gold standard for diagnostic, but can it allow us to track progress where in an evolving state like weight loss?
And actually help promote the positivity. They see the correlation with this improving.
Which is so important for behavioral change.
I also in addition to that, I also rely on the CPAP data a lot. So usually are that on AutoPAP, so we'll start seeing their pressures trending down. And so if their pressures are getting fairly low, they're encouraged by that. And then it's like, oh, your pressures have gotten down quite far. Maybe it's time to do another study. Or yes, you've lost 50 pounds, but your CPAP numbers are, your AutoPAP's still going up to a pressure of 12 most of the time. You clearly still have sleep apnea, so we're not going to waste our time or money with a test. So I think that's a helpful tool as well.
So then on to another topic. We were kind of talking informally before we started about the unique needs of our specialty where APPs, NPs, and PAs do not necessarily have much exposure to sleep before they get into this field. And so the challenge is always figuring out how to onboard them in a way that is successful so this can be a career that they stay in and enjoy. But it's a lot of content and a lot of role development in the specialty compared to what they might have come out of school with or come from a different specialty on. So I'd like to get each of your thoughts on some of your experiences with onboarding APPs broadly or within your own institution. So we'll start with Anne. Talk a little bit about maybe your institution, because I know you've had a lot of experience with onboarding in a growing program.
Yeah, so I've onboarded a lot of APPs in the last 15 years. And it's so unique because most other specialties that they're going to work in, they have at least a decent level of exposure to it in school or in their clinicals, and it's going to be on their boards. Like even if you're going to work in GI is a whole section on the boards. It's a whole section in school, but sleep's not like that. And for the most part, there is little to no sleep content at all in PA or NP curriculums at all. When I was in training, I got, I think, maybe 60 seconds about sleep apnea. Yeah, you stop breathing, you should order a sleep study and CPAP. That was it. And I saw one patient on all my rotations where we ordered a sleep study, but I was gone before the results came back. So there really is, it's unique in that way at the lack of education and exposure coming into it. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. What I have done and my institutions have done at my recommendation is really taken the time to onboard them very slowly. We have been very thoughtful not to throw them to the wolves. They're terrified because they're coming into a specialty they know nothing about, right? So they don't know, hey, am I even going to like it? What am I doing? It's such an unknown territory. So the model that we have adopted is at first, there's just a lot of shadowing, and we have them just shadow all of the providers so they can get a sense for different people's styles, hearing different people do it differently. In my program, we do have some niches within our program. So we have 2 sleep neurologists that do a lot of the parasomnias. We have sleep ENT that handles the surgery side and the Inspire. So they're getting little tidbits from everybody. And then the other thing that we've done, which I think is absolutely critical, is having whomever is teaching and training that person, hopefully it's not falling on one person, but everyone in your clinic is helping out. But having that trainer, if you will, have time carved out away from clinic to teach, because there's only so much you can cover well. Hey, we have 2 minutes between patients. Hey, did you have any questions about that one? Great, we're behind. You can't do a thorough job, right?
Which is every day.
It's just every day. I mean, you can do that with like students, but when you're trying to teach someone like really how to be an excellent provider in the field of sleep medicine, it takes time. So
let me
having
ask-
that dedicated time is really helpful.
Let me ask a question. Do you start with OSA or like with follow-up versus new? What are some of those first building blocks you like to start with?
So we definitely start with OSA because that is the most common thing that we're going to see. And then once we start having them see patients, we build a schedule very slowly. So you're going to have, a few hours, and then each week we increase their clinical capacity. We do not open up their schedule to the centralized scheduling because they would get bombarded with everything. So we tightly control their schedule within our clinic. We usually start out, we cherry pick run-of-the-mill, like pretty easy OSA follow-ups, and then we put more difficult patients on their schedule, then we move to new patients, and then as they're doing well, we get them into, restless legs and narcolepsy and everything else. So if you take the time, it takes a lot of time, non-billable time because you're not seeing patients. But I think if you do that and invest the time, they are trained so well. And everybody that I've trained in that model over 15 years still works in sleep. So I think it's successful. What are your thoughts?
Well, and that's an ideal situation.
It is ideal.
In a private practice, right, you have to convince those shareholders
Right.
about this non-billable time, both for the preceptor or mentor and like the new employee. And I think part of the challenge is the most successful one that is currently in there was my student. So she happened to get exposed to sleep medicine in my hybrid practice. So she had a leg up. We did hire somebody else that wasn't as successful because, again, you have to have that understanding that they're not going to be a high producer. So the system has to understand to mentor a new provider in this role, which is so specialized without any underlinement of, cardiovascular or those kind of things we get in school. It's just going to be a realistic expectation of the employers.
And I think you're kind of unique because you're predominantly surrounded by physicians in your role within your organization because you've really elevated yourself within your organization. So you're almost the educator for physicians. And I found early on when I was kind of in this space that I had to really educate physicians that these are not fellows. Like that's what they were used to. And so they thought they would come pre-trained. And it would be great if you could get fellows, but go out and try hiring them, right? There's not enough for the jobs we have. So if you need to pivot, they have to understand that part of that pivot is recognizing that you're going to be doing part of the education and the support for career growth. And if you don't, you're going to burn them out and you're going to lose money in the long run. And it's where that investment is at.
That cost analysis, what is not only a fellow or a new employed physician cost you versus a little more time up front for that APP, right? It's going to be less cost intensive, but you have to be realistic about it, and it's probably a 6 months to a year to they're somewhat proficient. And even that, building more skills, like you said, Ann, it takes a long time to build those skills. But I am excited that the gal who mentored under me, who's now working with them, is going to be a shareholder in that practice.
Oh, that's great.
So we are really growing in some of the private practices, and I'm in a state that doesn't have restrictions on licensure. So I'm on the state with that. So we're able to, be on par in somewhat in the practice, which is great.
I also want to put a little plug in for the work the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, or AASM, did. And Ann and I were part of this project. And it goes back 10 years?
I think
So something 8 to 10,
12,
something.
10, 12 years, yeah.
So it's been a bit. It's been a minute. And what we realized was there was a need for this onboarding to provide the basic education that the physicians in small practices and in big practices did not have time for. And so we developed, there was a whole group, a lot of people involved in developing an educational package that they offered, and then they have refined over time. And they've actually just made a big change that it falls now under their A-STEP program and has some additional modules added in. But it has been very popular for physicians because then they can sort of know that there's a basic level of education that they're not responsible for creating and providing. And so then they can focus more on the clinical piece of like, okay, how do you apply that to this patient? You've got the basic building blocks of your knowledge. Now let's talk about where we're going from there. And it was really like, we didn't even imagine where it would go. I mean, I remember trying to pitch it and be like, well, they needed to be on demand. Like, we can't do a course here because you never know when they're going to enter. So we need to have ongoing and on demand before that was a thing in by and large. And so it really was like a paradigm shift. And thankfully, there were some innovative people within the ASM that can embrace that early idea, and they've just continued to refine it. And it's really been a help to physicians, and then a help back to those APPs because they have a better onboarding experience and they can get some knowledge without having to pepper their collaborating physician for all of the information, which they appreciate too, because they want to be strategic in how they use their time. So I'm glad that that has worked out. And I know the ANP has also done some work in just trying to help transition new graduates into practice. And so there's a lot of resources out there if people kind of learn where they are and then share them with others.
Both institutions I've worked at over the years, since that product or course has come out, every time a new APP comes on board, we pay for them to have that. We buy that for them, basically, as soon as they start. So,
And that's a great idea, too. So it's not a limitation financially for that new person, right? And it gives them the luxury of being able to take it at their own pace because it is on demand.
It's also kind of welcoming to do that too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, well, we want to help.
Yeah, and we do want to, really, expand sleep medicine. And let's face it, there's not enough physicians training for anything nowadays. And we are part of the wave of the future, and to do it well is important.
yeah. It's also really important because a lot of what we do on the ground every day is not in books, right? So yes, you can learn from a book or a webinar, how do you screen for sleep apnea? What's the appropriate test? How do you, what are the treatment options? But a lot of our patients, most of our patients are probably going to be on PAP. PAP management, like reviewing downloads. What do I do if the patient has this complaint? What do I do if the patient has this complaint? Their AHIs, all of that doesn't exist in a textbook anywhere. And that's stuff that gets passed down person to person, generation to generation, and it takes someone that has the expertise to teach them that, like, oral tradition, if you will.
Well, that's the art of practice.
Right.
That's why it is an art.
Well, that was a good plug for this conference.
Well, there you go.
I believe there are many APPs teaching other APPs their unique knowledge and their own experience within their educational pathway and their clinical experience. And everyone has a little different. Like for Anne, she does a lot as she works at Elevation. So she does a lot more bi-level advanced modality and central sleep apnea. And so she's my resource when I have a question of things that I don't encounter as much at C-level in my more community-based practice. So it's also nice, the network that we have here, to be able to figure out who are those contacts. And Nan, we go way back and have been talked in terms of collaborating and educational offerings as well. So it's really nice to be here and be with everyone and post-COVID and have a chance to have a chance to do all this networking and professional development again. So we're going to wrap up. We really appreciate APAPP for giving us the opportunity to have this chat while at the conference. And I appreciate both of you for participating, and we appreciate everyone for listening. Thanks for joining us.